It's my great honor to introduce Susan Barrett. Susan is the director of the Center for Social Behavior Support at Old Dominion University. She has a master's in counseling psychology and certification in special education. She's been a teacher, an administrator, and a PBIS state coordinator. She currently serves as an implementer partner with the United States Office of Special Education Programs, OSEP Center on Positive Behavior Interventions and Supports. In her role with the center, she assists with large-scale implementation of PBIS by providing training and technical assistance to states and districts in the country. She's worked with Johns Hopkins University, University of Virginia, and University of New Hampshire to evaluate the impact of PBIS on students, school staff, and school communities. She serves on the Association of Positive Behavior Support's Board of Directors. At the center and with the Michigan Department of Education, we are terribly proud to work with Susan as she co-leads the development of the Interconnected Systems Framework, a mental health and PBIS expansion effort. She's been published in areas of large-scale adoption of PBIS, mental health, cost-benefit analysis, advanced tier system development, and the adoption of evidence-based practices in schools. And I'm terribly excited to hear what she has to say.
Thank you so much, Lisa. I really appreciate that. And good afternoon, everyone. It's really an honor and privilege to be with you today and have you join us over the next hour for part one of the Back to School, Back to Basics series. A huge shout out, first and foremost, to my friends and colleagues in this work. It is always a team effort, and I just wanted to acknowledge those who have really helped pull all of this content together that I'm sharing with you today. In terms of setting up this session, I want to make sure that as we lean into this adjustment period, that we're able to capture some really clear, specific action steps to move us forward. And I want you to think about how the examples that I share with you today can translate to your current context, knowing that we're always in an adjustment period. And I want you to be thinking about how your team can apply these components based on your particular situation, your context, the age group that you're serving, and the culture that you have. A good way to organize the content might be to think about what we need to do now in terms of organizing all of the tasks ahead of us, what we do and commit to during the first 2 weeks when we come back together, whether that's in distance learning or in face-to-face, and then how do we continue to maintain the momentum across the entire school year. So first and foremost is, again, really capturing specific things that you can take away and start to implement after today's session. To really organize this, I wanted to offer that while we're talking about back to basics, I wanted to highlight a couple of components to this session. This will build off of Dr. Brandy Simonson's first session that many of you were able to attend. And it's really going to build on this notion that we need to go back to a routine, that's really going to be important as we create a resilient community. Excuse me. We'll take a little bit of a deep dive into student-teacher relationships, and then we'll talk about a system of support and designing a system of support for staff. We'll next go into an expanded team protocol and really looking at an expanded data set that will drive much more of an upstream type of activity so that we can focus on prevention and building pro-social communities. And we'll then touch a little bit on uncovering the needs of our families, our students, and our staff by implementing screening protocols, but also by using the relationships and fostering the care and connections and figuring out the stories that will inform us on how to guide decisions with respect to increasing supports for all, or if our students need a little bit more intensity as we move forward. So with that, I wanted to organize the content of today using the MTSS and PBIS framework. And for me, this is such an important construct because as we're in this this kind of new normal and in a continuing adjustment period, the framework for me really helps drive this notion of the core features being the thing that stays constant, even though our teaching and learning contexts change. The framework also helps us really pull in and align and integrate mental health, trauma-informed approaches, and our social emotional learning curriculum right alongside our academics. In doing so and in leaning on the core features of the framework that you all have worked so hard to develop, we're really emphasizing a whole system response. And the infrastructure that's been established throughout the state of Michigan really helps us with this all hands on deck approach and has us really focusing on the prevention pieces of the framework. It also allows us to provide an instructional platform or framework to pull in our social emotional competencies into the fabric of the academic arena. Additionally, it helps us focus on the data that's needed so that our teams can constantly improve, constantly look to see if we're implementing with fidelity, if we're following through with what we said we were going to do, so that we can evaluate the impact it's having on our students, our families, and our staff. And finally, if it is making an impact with your students, we want to be able to sustain it. So again, this framework really helps us be able to sustain over the longer term. You know, when I reflect on what the education and the mental health community has been able to do during the spring when we were in a shelter-in-place mode, I wanted to pull us back into this notion that we're going to really be required to continue this agile thinking, right? And I wanted to offer an example that many of you probably shared at the moment in time when we knew that our kids weren't going to be able to get food assistance in our schools. In this one community, they realized that there was going to be a significant need and that there are many more children and families that were going to be impacted throughout the community were going to need food assistance. When they started to comb through the data to figure out how they were going to position how to do this, they ran into a barrier around confidentiality and being able to share specific information related to that. They did not let that stand in their way, right? They were very much focused on having a laser focus on building a solution. So rather than use specific information related to individuals, they stepped back and they looked at the aggregate data. And that drove their response and how they would allocate and distribute a finite amount of resources in an effective and efficient way. And so the solution was that they identified the 4 schools with the largest number of need, and those 4 schools became the food distribution centers. They also reached out to other partners in the community, and they commingled the funding in order to make this happen. Right? And so when I think as we come back in the fall, we're going to continue to need this innovative and creative ways of thinking about things and standing back and looking at the whole system and looking at that balcony view and not letting perceived barriers get in the way of our solution-focused energy. We know that there will be greater need for social, emotional, and mental health support for so many of us. And we're going to need this type of thinking as we move forward. So I just want you to continue to work with each other and help us focus on this innovative processes. I have a worry, right? And I think we all share in this worry and concern is that while we want to recover academically, we know that learning will not occur unless emotional needs are met. And those emotional needs need to be met by our whole community, right? Our staff, our families, our students, we're all in this together. And the multiple crises that we face right now also include a series of budget cuts, which again elevates our stress. We know that stress often leads to a range of responses. So how do we predict what some of the responses will be and help fortify and strengthen our tier 1 approaches so that we can mitigate those responses that might perhaps be quite negative? We also know that our staff, our families, and our students are scared. And so how do we as a team collectively mitigate that? How do we build and foster caring connections and support one another and be very clear and transparent about how we're going to come back together? We may want to retreat into our silos because we seek comfort in our old routines and old contingencies. And we really need our teams to remind us that we need an integrated approach, and we have this opportunity, right, the silver lining of rearranging the conditions to meet this new demand. We also know that a stressed and overwhelmed workforce may increase implicit bias, and it may result in an overuse of exclusionary discipline, which will ultimately lead to increased inequities. So it's going to be really important that as district and state leaders, we create a system where we're de-stressing staff and we're offering ongoing support throughout the year, and we're really influenced by this Maslow's hierarchy of needs, because that cannot go out the window when we start down the path 3 to 6 months from now. I worry about the increase in need, but alongside the budget cuts, I wanted to offer this new resource because it highlights the fact that when we do Tier 1 really, really well, we get a solid return of investment. Specifically, we see a net total cost savings of about $368,000 per 100 students when we're implementing Tier 1 alone. And we see about an $86,000 recovery cost for students in secondary school. But then look at the implications below, right? The potential now to launch from that framework and be more inclusive of bringing our mental health partners, our community partners, our families together, and committing and adopting this way of work. We can maximize our cost savings, right? When we fortify and strengthen our partnerships and we increase our opportunities to blend funding, it will lead to a greater impact for a wider range of people that we're serving within our community. So I wanted to offer that as a resource if you're worried about some of the budget costs, because what we know is that prevention actually will be a huge cost savings in the long run. So if you were with us during the first session, Dr. Brandy Simonson took us through this new resource that we have provided in partnership with some other national technical assistance centers. And we're really proud of this. But I want to remind you that this isn't something that we would read cover to cover, right? And so we're going to take components that match our specific need within our community. And we will be conducting a series of webinars throughout this year that will highlight different components of this document. Today, I wanted to focus on setting us up for success in our return to school, and also focus in on staff wellness. Combined with that resource, you also have an extraordinary resource that was put out by your governor's task force. And there are some solid recommendations in this. And so I'm going to use the national resource as well as your local resource to kind of pull in and give you some really specific things to consider as you're creating and developing your action plan. Before we get there, I can't highlight enough that we really have got to think about ways that we prioritize Maslow's hierarchy of needs at both the individual and organizational level. And we do this in conjunction with our instructional work, but we have to make sure that we're paying attention to this across the school year, because we've got a Maslow before we're able to bloom. And so just really be thinking about that, again, through your action steps and through our journey with each other this year. The mental and social emotional well-being components that we're going to talk about today will absolutely be nested in every aspect of what we do. They'll be nested in the safety protocols that your governor put forward. They'll be nested in the instructional work that we do and in the operations functions that we do. And I'll give you some examples about what that looks like in a couple of minutes. We know that there will be an increased need. We know that the system of need for mental health supports was overwhelmed prior to this, and it will continue to rise. We will not be able to hire out of this. And so it's really about transforming how we deliver social emotional health supports. And it really is going to require an all hands on deck approach. And we need our social emotional leaders to really build the capacity out so that all of our educators feel confident and competent to handle this increased need. And I want to script the moves a little bit for you today in terms of how we bridge those things together, because so many of us have not been trained and don't feel like we've got the skills to handle some of the mental health needs that our communities are going to have. In the current context, data will be really, really important. And I wanted to give some national trend data related to what I was seeing last week when I was looking at some of the data that I'm really concerned about, and I'm sure you share that concern with me. We know that the coronavirus cases are increasing, and unfortunately, the deaths are as well. And we know what a huge impact that has on our psyche as a country. Coupled with that, we also have an unemployment rate that surged with the expectation that now 32 million Americans are now receiving unemployment benefits based on the information from our Labor Department. And then Columbia University has projected that there will be a 40 to 45% increase in homelessness. So how do we get in front of this, right? How do we again, strengthen what we've done at Tier 1 so that we have our eye on the way that these numbers are impacting our own communities and really pull this data out. And while I'm giving you data to reflect upon nationally, there will certainly be data to focus in on to expand our lens as it impacts our specific communities. Additionally, we've got about 14 million children that aren't getting enough to eat. So this is really going to be, again, as we think about our agile thinking and we think about the example I shared with you about really having partnerships and bringing in enough food and using schools as the way to make sure our kids are getting their basic needs met. We know that we're going to need to consider this before we can expect students to succeed within our classrooms. And so just keeping our eye on the ball will kind of help us with that upstream view. I also wanted to highlight some specific data impacts from Washington State Department of Health. They looked at trends in mental health symptoms when they compared it to other crises that have happened prior to COVID. And some of the things that they're expecting over the next 2 to 3 months are increased anxiety-related issues, increased depressive symptoms, and highest likelihood of risk of suicide to happen and occur between the months of October and December. Again, if we can get ahead of this and really put in protocols that allow us to recognize and respond really quickly with that all hands on deck, we can likely mitigate some of these waves of concern that we see in front of us, right? If we can predict it, we can set up the systems and have a whole system response to prevent it from happening to that degree. So a couple of deep breaths, right? There's a lot of information there that's really worrying and concern. We have to resist the temptation to add, and we've always said this prior, but right now is not the time to add a new initiative. We won't be able to do that very well. We also really need to make sure we're considering the needs of our children, our families, and our staff in our own communities, because each community might be impacted at different time points. So we need to also assess the current work, right? What have we done before, and how do we maintain what was working really well in our system, even as we launched into the distance learning platforms that were taking place in the spring? What was working really well, and how do we build upon that? We need to seek partnerships and strengthen those who have common outcomes with us, so we're not colliding with each other. We have a common way of work and a common approach to this. I can't mention enough how important it is that we continue to address and assess staff wellness, and that our districts are well positioned to create a system of support that's fluid. We need to eliminate efforts that aren't having an impact. So what are those things that we need to put on the front burner right now? What are the things that we can put as on the back burner that can wait until this moment in time has passed? And finally, how do we anchor this in a prevention approach using those MTSS features? And heck of a deal, you know, Washington State put out very clear guidelines on how we needed to activate and augment those partnerships and really build those social connections and encouraging coping skills, right? They talked about the fact that resilience can be intentionally taught and practiced and developed across all ages. And the science behind that is really exciting. And because as educators, we know how to teach, right? And if we can teach academics, we can absolutely teach the skills that will help us become resilient communities, right? And we can use the same approach and logic that we've applied in the academic arena to the mental health space. We also are going to need our volunteers, or all manners of social organizations, right? We're all in this together, and schools can't do this alone. But we can absolutely reduce the mental health symptoms for the overall general population when we bring our partners into this landscape. And the science is so clear, right? What it tells us about well-being, again, is that it's a skill, and that we can heal and we can improve well-being if we pay attention to it and we use it and we embed it into the fabric of our academic community. So let's design a strategy together, and let's really expand our idea about what mental health is, right? It's not just someone receiving services or supports from a specialist within an office space, right? This is what mental health looks like, right? It's those positive greetings. It's those connections that we have. And while this was pre-COVID, and we will get back there someday, I promise you, we still need to have a greeting strategy, right? We can do that in the distance platform. We can adjust it in our face-to-face options by doing air high fives and air hugs. But greeting each other and welcoming each other into our space will absolutely increase our wellness and a resilient effort. This is what mental health looks like, right? So really expanding our notion of that. When we come together in project-based managed or project-based learning activities or team-based activities, or when we try to solve problems together and we work together as a team, as a collective, this is also what mental health looks like. And we can actually repair our brains when we feel connected and we feel a sense of belonging. We will absolutely need to adjust how we interact with each other in this new space, but we can still be socially connected even though we might have a little distance between us. Similarly, our adults have bonded in ways that we haven't before. In the virtual platform space, it's amazing to me how much I've bonded with my colleagues and how much I rely on my mental health and wellness as we come into this progress together. So these small learning communities that we share with each other are also what mental health looks like. So how do we really expand our notion of that, right? At the end of the day, mental health is about strategies and skills, specifically on coping with anxiety right now and coping with stress. So it will be important, and we talk about this at the individual level. We talk about making sure that we're paying attention to ourselves and having time to be still, time to have the lights dim and some calming music, time for some breathing exercises, right? Those slow, deep belly breaths, time for ourselves to have daily activity and movement, time for biology breaks where we can stand and stretch and move. And perhaps the dose of how we position this in our day as individuals might increase during this time. We can also put these strategies and skills into our academic day, into our structures, right? And again, have some time across the day where we incorporate time to be still, time for us all to listen to music and use our breathing exercises. What will be your calming strategy system-wide, right? And how do we increase the dose of these right now, given that we're all feeling a bit on the stress strain? So this notion of mental health is for all, and that we all take responsibility for this wellness. We're talking about things like positive greetings. We're talking about incorporating positive connections and learning about each other. We're talking about building in those routines to incorporate those calming strategies and those physical activities and those biology breaks. But mental health also means that we've created consistent, predictable, safe, and equitable learning environments And through our work with PBIS and MTSS, we've actually established this. And we'll give you some examples about ways that we're expanding that to include social emotional learning supports. And finally, mental health is about having dependable, positive relationships and people that you know will be there. These activities actually promote resilience and healthy brain functioning, and their qualities are important, especially for students and staff who have experienced trauma. So as you're forming your action plan and you're thinking about designing your new approach to this landscape, what will your strategy be? How will you address stigma? How will we fit in what's working already in our system to the current context? What's our marketing and branding approach? And I get to hear different branding and marketing approaches from schools across the country. And I hear many communities talk about project wellness, or they talk about building a resilient community as their strategy for coming back, or their project Care Bear, or the new 3 R's, reopening, recovery, and relationships, and letting this be the strategy for decreasing stigma for mental health. Now, your governor's task force laid out in very clear detail some recommendations, and they are highlighted on page 29. And so they seem like a daunting task when you think about implementing a mental health screener for all. When you think about the communication and guidelines for being able to identify and quickly be able to respond to all of our student and staff need, right? It gets to be a daunting task when you think about all of the PPE that might be required, and you think about rearranging some of the roles and conditions. But these are systems changes that are really going to drive, again, our ability to be able to respond to a larger number of our students. So you see the list continue. As you look at that list, I want to offer that a way to think about making us feel much more realistic and feasible is organizing the list, right? For example, who should the lead entity be when you're talking about screening? In our interconnected system framework work, we think that screening is the job of the district, right? And the district takes the lead on identifying, installing a screener, and creating systems through teams. And they are the ones that take on that as leaders, rather than have every single school within that system design their own strategy for screening. So who will take the lead? You could also organize these activities by time. What has to happen right now? What can we focus in on the first 2 weeks? And then finally, what do we need to focus on 6 months to a year from now? Or you can organize by topic. But either way, we need a feasible and realistic timeline so that we don't feel like we're overwhelmed with a task list. So I wanted to offer a couple of examples that I've seen in districts. And this district has a laser focus on providing supports to students, families, and staff, right? Their commitment to all 3 of those entities is powerful, and you can see that displayed in everything that they're putting out on their website, phone calls, letter writing campaign, and different modalities. The other thing I wanted to call your attention to as a really great example of being able to script the moves and having the district be the ones charged with this activity is this example, right? So what they've done is they've scripted the moves for students, and they've been very clear on what the expectations and routines and procedures that are different and unique now as they go back into a hybrid approach. And so when you go on the website, and I've provided the hyperlink for you, when you click on any one of these items, you get a list of things that we're expecting our kids and having our families and staff support us in doing. So I wear my mask. We load the bus from back to front now. The bus windows stay open, and if it's raining, we shut them a little bit. I sit next to my brother and sister. It goes on further to be very explicit and script the moves for what it looks like and sounds like during a wrap-up activities. And finally, they've built in consistent mechanisms across all of the schools by having this final list where all of the schools are committed to classroom sizes of 14 students. They talk about movement, they talk about practicing safety routines and frequent hand washing. So I just wanted to offer this as an example and a way to really task analyze all of the things we're expecting our students to do, and ways that we can all get on the same page with these new rules and routines and strategies. Right, so as we design our own environments and we think about the safety protocols, and this is really critical, right? And Brandy talked about this, about the fact that getting back to this routine is absolutely one of the pillars of trauma recovery. We know when we put this in place and we script the moves for our students, our families, and our staff, we're actually going to manage the stress for the vast majority, right? When we have a common set of expectations, when we know what's going to be required of us, and when we get input and buy-in and reflection out of our community partners, we're going to be invested in doing this. So the words need to reflect the cultural identity and the norms that are in our own communities. We need to be helping each other be predictable and consistent. We need to be explicit in how we instruct. We're going to now add those personal safety and universal precautions. And we have to remind each other that we have to show compassion and be patient with each other as we're learning these new routines. So now is the time to design a system of support for de-stressing staff. And just like our students need clear, concrete expectations, procedures, and routines, so do our staff. Our staff also need direct instruction right now, right? We don't have the bandwidth that we normally have to take in new information. So it will be really important for us to build fluency and have opportunities to practice these new routines, these new arrangements, these new conditions we find ourselves in. We're going to need input and feedback ratios, and probably more like 10-to-1 with each other as we learn and navigate this new landscape. And so I wanted to offer an example because I get de-stressed when I go to Trader Joe's. Of all of the grocery stores out there, I know that when I go here that I've got a positive, safe, predictable environment, and it is the same every time I go. There are positive affirmations and really clearly designated spaces so I can ask questions at any time. I've got really clear expectations, and they're scattered throughout the line so I can take in that information as I stand in line. They're very clear. There's pictures that go with it, right, that follow that thinking. If I were to show you this video, I won't, but there's music playing in the background. So there's this positive energy outside, and you can even see the woman dance a little bit if you click on that. And so there's just this positive energy there. And then it doesn't look like it, but she's smiling, and she's telling me she's smiling, and she's welcoming me in, and she's got a little fun sanitizing station, right? So the whole part of this is positive. And so if we can pull in this logic into our schools, we will de-stress our staff. We'll have very clear expectations and routines. So as we come back, we need to have staff days, right? We need times where we check in with each other. A couple of things that we should probably expect to be emotional, right? That first time we're together in a space, we will be emotional. It will surprise us, right? We will be exhausted. We need to be able to track our triggers throughout coming back, because we know that our students will have similar response, and we will have compassion because we will have recognized that in ourselves and be able to help support our students as we see some pretty extreme behaviors as they are probably going to be very emotional when they come back into school, whenever that takes place. The common experience that we've all had actually increases our sense of belonging and connection with one another, and allows us to be a little bit more vulnerable. We need to have opportunities to practice. So how will you walk every inch of the building in small groups where you're physically distanced, to get accustomed to those new routines? Because when we feel comfortable, we'll be able to model that calm when our kids come back. Right? We've seen examples of the matrix, and we've seen ways that we're having one matrix that's designed for any teaching and learning context. It's all, we're going to stick to the language, the common expectations, the agreements, and we're just going to employ pulling in those safety protocols now into that teaching matrix. And that's familiar to us. So it'd be really important to be able to stay constant and have this continue to be our common language and our common approach. It might be that decisions allow us to add to this. So if we are considering a calming strategy, in what ways do we pull that into the teaching matrix and instruct and have teachers help model that and help support utilization of those skills when we feel upset. So it's about pulling those social emotional elements into something we're already accustomed to doing. And I wanted to offer an example of that today. We'll also need to know what to do when, right? That will also help us de-stress. So what do I do when I'm out of sanitizer or I'm out of soap? What if I have a student who is refusing to wear a mask? What happens when a person within our community tests positive? What if I need a break and I need a team member to fill in for me? What if I recognize that someone, a student or a colleague or a friend needs help? What will the procedures and routines be for that? How will our district design a system so we have an opportunity to practice, have opportunities to huddle together and debrief together and do some self-reflection? And in doing so, improve the process to make it easier over time as we become accustomed to this new normal we find ourselves in. So I wanted to offer perhaps an agenda that you could use as we prepare for day one. And we really focus in on staff, right? And we really are going to lean in to our district and school leaders to stay with us throughout those first days, right? And it could be that we meet and welcome outside and that we use a restorative morning circle opener to be together, that we have music on and we have time just to be together outside. And in doing so, we have an opportunity to practice how to enter and exit the building, because that could change now. What will be your procedure? Will you conduct temperature checks? Will you have a sanitizer station, right? How does the district and school leaders model for our welcome back as we enter into this space? What will our revised school matrix look like? How could we break into small teams and take a tour and walk through those distancing protocols in our new spaces? We could practice the lineup routine, the new traffic flow. We can become familiar with the prompts, including the posters. And this allows us actually to have our leaders provide direct instruction to all of our staff so we're all on the same page and we can create consistency. It will be important to be aware of moments during that first day where you're triggered so that you can predict when you think your kids might be triggered. And when you see those extreme behaviors, it will help incorporate some perspective sharing. And so you'll be able to respond with grace and compassion rather than again, increasing stress. So those self-reflection, those huddles. You can have the same process for your orientation days as families come back and we want to de-stress our families in this space. And finally, another consideration, how do we ask, or do we ask our staff and students to wear something similar to a medical bracelet that lets us know they're exempt from wearing a mask, right? Again, just something to consider. In the afternoon of that day, we can break into grade level meetings and talk about these routines specific to our age group that we are supporting, right? So for example, younger children might be exempt from wearing masks inside the classroom, and they might need a different procedure for transition times. This will help us be really clear and specific to the grade level that we're supporting. I noticed in the protocols that hand washing should be conducted at least every 2 hours. Why not use this in conjunction with your calm routine or your biology break, right? Incorporate putting music on and dimming the lights and having a chance to have our belly breath at the same time we're doing our hand washing procedure. In the afternoon, maybe run some practice scenarios, having our staff you know, what happens when we get a call or a text that somebody's tested positive, and allowing us to practice and feel confident with that, allowing us to practice our fire and crisis drills with a new traffic flow. And then again, how do we practice our staff huddles or reflection activities and our feedback so that when we come back day 2, We get another opportunity to practice. We practice our calming strategy. We build a routine to have a morning circle so we can bond with each other. And we might address different focus topics depending on the data and the needs of our specific community. So I've offered some focus topics there during day 2. Now, just offering that as an example, I'm sure that you all have amazing strategies that you'll be able to share with each other. Another piece of this, as I think about designing a system of support for staff, is this notion that we're all feeling a bit overwhelmed, especially as we lean into thinking about trauma-informed care and SBL and wellness and mental health, and factoring that in with all the other things that concern us. And so I wanted to offer a way to crosswalk the information. And I wanted just to highlight the fact that when we focus in on our Tier 1 components, when we expand the utilization of those components, we can actually address our trauma-informed component and our social-emotional behavior skill component. So let me give you an example. Right, I shared with you a teaching matrix that included strategies for coping and calming, and we put those skills, right? What do we want kids and staff to say and do when we're teaching as a result of teaching the skill, right? We can put that right on the teaching matrix. We can teach our social emotional lessons right as we were delivering our behavior lessons, right? We can do that in a morning circle routine where we're actually building classroom community. When we expand the utilization of the components of the framework, look at what we are able to accomplish in the trauma-informed and social-emotional buckets, right? So this will help us collapse these things and have a fully integrated approach, and strategizing and fortifying and strengthening Tier 1 will actually impact the vast majority of people that we're supporting. So if you want more about that, I wanted to offer a brand new resource. It's integrating a trauma-informed approach within a PBIS framework. And we give really specific and clear guidance on ways that you can converge these things within the core features of the framework. So that was what we can be doing now and the focus of the system of support for staff. I next want to think about the first 2 weeks of school and really focusing on and highlighting time and space and platform for us to develop caring connections with one another and build relationships with one another. We know that in order for students to be successful and as we set up conditions for learning, I just wanted to offer this. When students, we know, work harder when teachers they like and respect. And so when I'm asked as a teacher, how do I get kids to like and respect me? The immediate response is like and respect them first. And part of that is getting to know them and making sure that there is a sense of connection and belonging. And so in those first 2 weeks, really be thinking about ways that we can connect with one another, even if that's in a virtual landscape. How do we give time and space for that? If we happen to be able to go into a face-to-face classroom setting, we might only have a limited time before there might be a little whiplash and we're back into a virtual setting or distance setting. So it will be really important to engage and learn about each other in these moments so that when we go back in that virtual setting, we already have connections laid out and we'll have more increased engagement and attendance in the virtual platforms. We know that behavior is a form of communication. And as we define and talk about compassion and grace, I want us to also be really thinking about in the past, the systems of support, when we didn't know what to do and we felt overwhelmed, we often over-relied on punishment strategies when we saw behaviors that were kind of out of the norm or quite scary. But actually, those were ways that our students were communicating us that they were hurting, and we needed to rearrange the conditions and provide more support. So in this new space, I want to offer that we need to heal the hurt, right? And we need to use that instructional process and replacement skills and increase support. And the way we heal the hurt is by first knowing the name of the students that we're serving and know their stories, and really being able, instead, when we do see odd behaviors and things that aren't safe, that we can say to them, I hear you, I see you, and I would like to help you. Let's figure out a way that I can support you, right? And that should be our first response. And so how do we rearrange the conditions where more of us are healing the hurt instead of punishing the hurt? One way to keep track of this could be that when we start to lean into learning about our students and their families is to list the students and to maybe work through in the first couple of weeks to make sure that you can check off all of these buckets at the end of the 2 weeks. And that it will help, again, organize where you might need to spend a little bit more time with a specific student because you don't yet know something personal about them, right? And it might take a little bit more time for others to come out and feel like you're a trustworthy adult and I can confide in you and share something personal about me. So we don't have to push it necessarily, but this might help us organize as we lean in and get a whole child perspective as we think about supporting our students. Brandy also helped us go through some of these greetings and the ways that we might check in, and some of the strategies for making sure that we spent time with some of our students are harder to get to know by maybe engaging in a 2x10 strategy. And so we've incorporated that into our resource as well. And perhaps we can take a deeper dive in the future on some of these other ways that we can make sure that we're connecting with our students. So the bottom line here is that we need to prioritize the first 2 weeks on building a sense of community and trust, on figuring out our stories, and those stories might change really rapidly. So keeping on top of that will be really critically important. Being able to teach and practice and get fluent with our new routines, and making sure that in doing so, we have informal ways of uncovering academic and social emotional needs because we have built some trusting relationships and we're much more able to be transparent and honest, and we can uncover things because we've built those relationships. Similarly, this gives us the opportunity to really build some small learning communities, not only for our students, but also for our teachers. And so in what ways are we distributing the workload across teams of teachers and building on each other's strengths and preferences and divvying up different tasks so we don't feel like the onus is on us? So teams are so critically important, and our small learning communities, again, will be part of the wellness package. Teams are really the backbone of any MTSS, so it will be really important that we invest in a single set of teams and we don't splinter off the work to different subset of teams. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the district community team and its support on a daily basis, and a continuation of this throughout the year. I want us to be considering as a team, are we doing enough at Tier 1 to meet the vast majority of student and family need? To what extent have we matched the need? To what extent are we continuously getting feedback from the people that we're serving and adjusting it accordingly? How do we fortify and strengthen Tier 1? Because so many times we want to increase supports for students without taking that balcony view and really rearranging the system to meet the need. Who's missing from our expanded lens? What data should we be using to really give us that expanded lens? How do we elevate our social emotional leaders and really amplify their voices and help them build the capacity for more staff to take ownership over the wellness activities that I've just described earlier? What data will we need, right? What are we already doing? How do we build and connect with that? I've highlighted the daily basis piece because I think it's such an important construct. It will be really easy to focus on this in the first 2 weeks, but we need to continue our charge moving forward over the entire year, and I would say forever, right? But we need our district community teams really to give us that expanded lens. We also need our school leadership teams to be actively pursuing and uncovering the needs and looking at an expanded data set that will help us make decisions about what evidence-based practices we might need moving forward in the future, and that we make decisions as a team and we don't rely on any one individual to make decisions about installing a brand new initiative, but it is a team effort. In this way, it helps us move away from a co-located system to a fully integrated system. And so again, I wanted to offer an example from the Department of Health in Washington. And our teams are now relying on these weekly status situation reports to help us stay in front of some of the things that we know are going to impact our schools moving forward. And so they've got some weekly survey data, they've got some information related to suicide attempts, suicide ideation, some drug overdose related emergencies, and they've got some suicide cases that they're concerned about. In this way, having that expanded data set again allows our expanded team to be more upstream and to really be thinking about things that we do that will position us to be at the ready to handle some of the things coming our way. So it's much more of a surveillance mindset and actively uncovering the needs prior to students needing to for a problem to arise and then respond to it. So these weekly reports are very critically important. So what Department of Health can you rely on, and who are the people in public health that might have access to some of the data so you can lean into that larger balcony view? Additionally, we are always adjusting our problem solving, right? But this is kind of that through line. We can continue to meet whether we're in lockdown mode or shelter in place mode, or whether we're back in a hybrid fashion or face-to-face. We can have a through line, a common agenda that carries us through with those common routines established that will also help our wellness. So I just wanted to offer ways that we're enhancing our meeting agendas in this space. And we're incorporating wellness checks and taking time to, again, make sure that we're taking care of one another. We're also really relying on designing as we expand our teams and we're bringing our community and our family partners into this space. We're designing a new strategy with our families. And again, we're relying on those core features with MTSS to design a common approach and a common way of work in this space. So this is an example of a district who took the core features and actually made it part of their strategic plan and their commitment as they move forward. So I wanted to offer that as an example. They've also incorporated a co-coaching model where they're pulling in their mental health providers and their educators to support and coach schools. Right? The infrastructure, again, that you all have established has been fantastic, and we need to lean in on our coaches to make sure that we don't move into an unacceptable variation, but we stay within the core features that we have in our fidelity measures that, for instance, the tiered fidelity inventory. So as we expand out, it's also important that we are adhering to fidelity. I want to spend just a couple of minutes on uncovering the need with screening. If you're fortunate enough to have already have a universal mental health or social emotional behavior screener, continue to screen. If you do not have one, be cautious right now. It might be too much to put in a formal screener, but that's not to suggest that we don't need it down the road or that we're not really paying attention to how we actively use other data to uncover the need. We're going to need to engage in a lot of professional learning around this. We need to take time for not only training our teams to lead this way, but also coaching supports to make sure that we've got fidelity of implementation and we've got a system where we're able to respond really quickly. We also need to realize that multiple data sources will inform how we approach this work, and that if we see an increase in positive screens about 30%, and we might be overwhelmed if we're just thinking about increasing supports for those students rather than thinking about strategies that allow us to strengthen and fortify our tier 1 system. So when you feel the moment that you need to reach for the Pepto-Bismol, it's time to step back and look at the ways that we maximize the influence of the tier 1 components that we've spent so much time on. right? Those tier 1 components should meet the vast majority of needs. If you don't have a screener, these are some other data sets to be thinking about. And so in what ways do you have an accurate picture? And again, stay at the balcony view, stay at the aggregate level for now. Think about the percentage, think about bringing this data set in an integrated fashion, and that will help that cohesion and integration in our whole child response in our team meetings. Think about the current data sets and the percentage of students that are currently engaging in distance learning. And what about how the families and students receiving food supports are going to change over time based on the economic impacts that many of our families are dealing with right now? What about the percentage of families that have been personally impacted? And what about the percentage of students and staff not returning? Right? These are going to be changing very, very quickly. So it'll be really important to stay on top of it and use our expanded team members to give us a broader view of what's going on in our community so we can be better prepared. Our team will also need to keep an eye on our staff, right? And really get the pulse of the staff and make sure they feel like they're being part of driving the solutions and their voice is heard, and they are looking at the data in real time with us and walking through the fire with us, right? And really making sure that we are fortifying and strengthening our tier 1 supports for our staff across this year especially. It might be right now, if you don't have a formal screener, that you rely a little bit more on family check-ins and family screeners. And so I wanted to offer this as an example of ways to uncover the need and get a little bit more specific detail from your families, since they are the ones that have those relationships with the kids that will be coming to us this year. Bottom line is to pick your priority data points, right? What do you need to know about what's going on in your community so you can get ahead of this? How do you prepare and how do you make this feasible and realistic? You could perhaps list some of the data sources that you already have right now, and then put a dialogue structure on top of that so that we can all formulate these solutions together and we can all feel a sense of belonging in building solutions as a community. And so I just wanted to offer that as an example. As we end this hour, I wanted to come back to the action steps. I covered a ton and I realized it was probably too much to try to do in an hour, but I wanted to offer that there are ways that we can organize all of these tasks if we can focus in on what we need to do now, what we do in the first 2 weeks, and what we need to focus in on across the school year. And so I kind of cheated and pre-populated some of the action steps for you, knowing full well that you'll put a lot of details in this. But the bottom line is to really focus on designing a system of support for our staff to decrease the stress so that we can model calm and be in a place where we're centered and grounded and can respond with compassion and grace moving forward. Here's my contact information. I've also put a couple of websites here. You will have access to the slide deck. I realized that I made some modifications and changes to the slide, so I will be reposting this on our PBIS website and on the Michigan website. And I am so grateful that you've spent this hour with us, and I look forward to learning from you in the second hour with the Michigan team. Thank you.